Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So today I am going to tell you guys about this little guy and the day he was born. So this is Cooper Dale. This is his first time on the channel. So here he is. He's almost 8 weeks old. Huh, see, I'm almost 8 weeks old. Yes. So he was born on October 9th at 8:13 p.m. and he weighed 8 pounds and 15 ounces. And he's been a chunky monkey since. Right? Right? So, let me go ahead and get started. So really, I feel like I should mention a little bit about the day before. So on October 8th, I had a membrane sweep. I was 41 weeks pregnant. And so membrane sweep, you can do some research if you don't know, but basically it just is supposed to kickstart your labor. If your body's ready for labor, it can sometimes give it the little kickstart that it needs. So then fast forward into the next afternoon around 12 o'clock p.m. I started having contractions, and I had had contractions before in my pregnancy. I had had Braxton Hicks and real contractions, so I don't want to say I knew that it was contractions because it was my first baby, but I could definitely feel them. I knew they were contractions. It was a clear start and stop, and they were timeable, and at that point they were 5 minutes apart, and they were lasting about 45 seconds. So we called the birth center and told them what was going on, and they said hang out a little while, don't come in yet. You know, they could tell just from the way I was talking on the phone. I was like, the pain is not unbearable. It wasn't where I had to stop. I mean, I could have conversations with people and they had no clue I was having them. You know, it was that, you know, that mild. And so we decided to go to lunch, my husband and I, Sean. So Sean and I went to lunch, and we went to IHOP. And we were there for about an hour and a half, and during that time they definitely picked up. They definitely got stronger. I could no longer talk through them. I had to really kind of focus when I was having them, and they got to about 4 minutes apart, lasting about a minute. So I decided after we had finished lunch, I called the birth center and let them know that I was coming in to be checked. And they were perfectly okay with that. They encouraged me to come in and see if I had progressed at all. The day before, when they did a membrane sweep, I was 3 centimeters dilated. And so I got there and they checked me, and she said I was 3.5, maybe 4. So I hadn't really progressed since the day before, maybe half a centimeter to a centimeter, so nothing to write home about. And so they sent me away and said to just kind of go and relax and labor some more, and if it got to the point, you know, as the pain got worse and stuff like that and the contractions got stronger, then they would consider having me come back in. They told me that because they had checked me that I should be experiencing some uterine irritability, and so I might feel like my contractions are getting stronger or closer together, but it could just be because they checked me, so really try not to just turn around and come straight back, just because that happens. So we left, and we were driving away, and my contractions really picked up. They got pretty strong, and it got pretty unbearable. And but my husband kept calling them, really, because I was to the point where I couldn't even call them. I was in so much pain and discomfort, so my husband was calling them and saying, hey, like, should we come back in? Should we come back in? And so we pretty much called him every 20 minutes until around 5 o'clock, 5:30. And kept asking, do we come in, do we come in? And they kept saying, well, you're just experiencing uterine irritability, so try to just wait and don't come in yet, basically. So, which was fine. I understand most first moms, their labors take, you know, they can take crazy, days before their baby actually arrives. So I understand that. I was in more pain than I thought that basically the human body could bear at that point. And finally, we call them, and my contractions were about 3 minutes apart, 2 to 3 minutes apart at this point, lasting anywhere between 45 seconds to a minute long. And we were keeping them up on how fast the contractions were and how much pain I was in, all that kind of stuff. So finally, around 5:30, my husband is on the phone with them on speakerphone, and we're telling her, like, hello, and we have a contraction app on our phone. On my phone, I had one that you just hit, like, when the contraction starts and stops, and it times the duration and the how far apart they are and all that kind of stuff. And it was funny because first it said, get ready to go to the hospital, and then it said go to the hospital, and then this is throughout the whole laboring process, and it said if you haven't got to the hospital, call an ambulance. We're still like laboring. They're like, no, don't come in yet. So finally around 5:30, my husband's on the phone on speakerphone with my midwife, and I'm listening to their conversation as I'm laboring. And she says, no, don't come in, call us back in about 45 minutes, and we'll check in and see where she's at that point and how she's feeling. And then and Sean was talking to her, and then she said, is that okay with you, Paige? Because she knew she was on speakerphone. And I said, no, it's not okay, it's time. And she said, okay, well then please come in. And so the birth center was about 30 minutes away from where we were at that point. And it was storming, and it was rush hour, and it was in our state. This was the only way to get where we were going. There wasn't like another way around. So that was fun. I was in full-blown labor. I'm not sure if it would be considered transition. Probably, I guess I would be. I was in transition when we were in the car. And I was in active labor while we were on from 2:30 to 5:30 when I was talking to them. So we get there, and the midwife and the nurse are there. It's a small birth center, so the only people there was no one else there because they closed at 5, and they don't keep staff 24/7 like a hospital does. So you call them if you go into labor, and they go there and they'll meet you there. So the midwife and the nurse were already there, and there was no one else in the building. And I go in, and they're like waiting in like right by the front doors for me, and I have a contraction. Like, the second I get to the door, I like fall on the ground because I can't even stand through them at this point. And they kind of like, they're like, it's okay, just finish your contraction. And so I finish my contraction, I get up and I walk to one of the rooms, and by the time I get to a room, I have another contraction, and I get on the bed and they check me while I'm having the contraction. And she goes, oh yeah, you're at 9 centimeters. She went, hang on a second, let me see if I can stretch you to 10. And she went, okay, whenever you're ready to push, just let us know. So, and that was a little after 6. I think it was around 6:15, 6:20, I think was about what time we officially got to the birth center. So, is he sleeping? He is. So, yeah. So that was exciting. I had no clue that I was that far along. So I was just kind of laboring on the bed and just trying to move around different positions and get up. And after about 15 minutes of being there, my water hadn't broken yet. After about 15 minutes of being there, it did break, and it felt like a pop, like a water balloon just burst inside me. It felt like I was like, oh. And it was during a contraction, and so my water broke. And so then we decided, because I could push whenever I felt like it, and the pain was really bad, so we decided to try to get in the tub for pain management. I didn't really have a strong urge to push, and so I got in the tub and decided it was I never really had that crazy instinctual, like my body's pushing for me this baby's coming out kind of thing that a lot of women talk about. I didn't really experience that. My urge to push more came from, that's the only way that I could get this to end, this pain, and so I'm going to push because I'm fully dilated. They said I can push, so if that's the only way for me to get this pain over with, then I'm gonna try to get him out so that the contractions would stop. So I decided to start pushing in the water, and they do allow water births, and that's what I was planning. I didn't have my head in my mind, I wasn't set on like I'm having a water birth, because I wanted to, if something didn't go as planned, I wanted it to not totally ruin my birth experience. I wanted to be able to go with the flow, and if things change, then things change, and that's fine. So I was having back labor, and so I was having a lot of pain down in my lower back, and it still was in my front too, but in my lower back as well, really bad. And so I was pushing kind of on my hands and knees in the tub, and when I would have a contraction and I would push, so this is like my back, I would like raise my butt up. And if you have a water birth, it's extremely important that you keep your hips under the water the whole time. And you can do more research on it, but for the baby's safety, it's important that you keep your hips under the water and you don't raise your hips up and then put your hips back in the water. So, because I was having the back labor, they said that that's probably why I was raising my hips during contractions, because I guess that's common when you have back labor. So I did that, and so they said, okay, you're done in the tub, you need to get out of the tub. So, and I was okay with that. So I got up out of the tub and got back onto the bed. At this point, I was just pushing through my contractions, and got back onto the bed, tried several positions of pushing on the bed, and was just not getting anywhere. I just couldn't. I had gotten him like lowered down a little bit, but it wasn't, it wasn't anything extreme. It was really not being very productive at all. I'm not sure exactly what time it was through all these points. I know that I pushed for roughly about an hour and a half, is what I was told. So just keep that in mind. So I did that, and so finally they were like, this isn't working for her. And I really felt like if I was gonna push on the bed, I needed something to like push my feet against, and their beds don't have stirrups, they're just normal beds. It's not like hospital beds with stirrups, so there's nothing to really like use as leverage, and I felt like I really needed that if I was gonna push on the bed. It just wasn't working for me. So they decided to try a birth stool. So they got the birth stool out, and so I sat on the birth stool. Sean sat behind me, so I kind of had him to like lean against if I needed to, and he could kind of look over my shoulder and still be involved in everything that was happening and whatnot. And so I had the nurse kind of was in front of me, and they were in the room the whole time. The nurse and the midwife both were attending to me during this whole thing. It wasn't like they were coming in and out. They were both in there for everything. I think one might have left for a minute, but there was one of them was in the room the whole time. So the nurse was like in front of me, and the midwife I think was getting things kind of prepped for when he came out. And I was pushing on the birth stool, and it was just, oh Lord, like I could not get this baby out for the life of me. Like, and it was just so bad. And I think, which this whole video is TMI, so if you're not into that, you might want to click out. But I was terrified of pooping. I hadn't pooped while I was pushing, and I was terrified of pooping, and I was terrified of tearing. I was just, I wasn't so much afraid of because I was like for like aesthetic reasons, I guess. I know that's probably conservative someone. It was the pain and the recovery that I was afraid of for tearing. So I was terrified of tearing. So I probably wasn't giving it my all for all of them. I was trying to push him out, but I probably could have pulled a little deeper through the whole thing, got him out a lot sooner. But I got him to basically where he was crowning. I could feel his head. They showed me in a mirror. I could see him. it was, you know, I could feel, you know, there's about this much of his head showing, and I could see his hair, and basically every time I would push, I'd push his, like, you know, to like his head out, and then once the contraction was over, it would, like, you know, kind of go back, and I'd push a little bit, and he'd come out, and then the contraction would finish, and when I stopped pushing, he'd kind of go back up a little bit. And I wasn't making a whole lot of progress. They said that was fine. They said if anything, I was kind of gonna prevent myself from maybe tearing as much, because I was kind of, they said, you know, stretching it as you go kind of thing. And so that was kind of where I was at. I was stuck there. I couldn't get past it. It was just, gosh. And so, this was all natural. I guess I'm sure you guys have figured that out by now, I would think. But I had a completely natural childbirth. So I wasn't on any, I didn't have any kind of pain meds or anything like that for any of it. So finally, you know, Sean's behind me, and they do check the baby. They don't do continuous monitoring, but they use a handheld Doppler, and they'll check the baby, you know, before contraction, during, and after, and make sure that the baby is not in distress and that they're doing okay in there. So they were doing that, and they were having a little bit of difficulty keeping his heartbeat on the Doppler. It probably was just the position he was in, you know, and they knew that, you know, it wasn't like immediate, oh my God, there's something wrong, but it's important that you be able to hear it so that you know they're okay. And so they were having issues hearing him, and his heartbeat would go out, and they'd kind of be like, okay, and then they'd find it again, and they'd be like, okay, well, but so basically, long story short, the midwife was on the ground, because I was on a birthing stool. She was sitting on the ground in front of me so she could catch him when he came out and everything. And she looked at me and said, okay, Paige, we don't know that your baby's okay. We can't say he's not okay, but we don't know that he is okay either. So on your next contraction, you need to push him out. I'm sure you can imagine, if you are a mother, what I felt in that moment. So basically my next contraction came, like, basically as she was finishing saying that. And it was funny because my instinct when pushing was to pull back instead of lean forward, and to do a more high-pitched scream instead of a low groan, which is what they tell you. So they kept saying low groans, bend in, you know, push into it, like, you know, low groans. And it's funny because when I finally pushed him out, I completely pushed back against Sean, like pushed back, like arched my back, and let out basically a bloody murder scream, and pushed with everything I had in me, and he came out head and shoulders and everything all at once. You know, time my baby might not be okay, I'll get that baby out. So he came out like a shooting baby missile. And so at that point, she caught him. I didn't know at this moment, but I found out after the fact that his umbilical cord was around his neck, but she got that undone. It wasn't any big issue. But whenever he came out, he did have his umbilical cord wrapped. That's fairly common. That's not any crazy thing that, you know, doesn't happen or anything. So then she, you know, she caught him, you know, kind of gave him a look over. It was clear that he was breathing and, you know, whatnot. Kind of put him up on me really quickly, and then like moved, oh, sorry, sweetie. Put him up on my lap, kind of where he's at now, kind of just set him on me, and then went back down to deal with everything that was happening, you know, on my southern end, southern half, I guess you could say. And it was funny because it wasn't that I was grossed out at all. It was just I wasn't expecting him to be as slippery as he was, and so whenever she put him up there and I grabbed him, she didn't pause to make sure I had him. And so he almost fell, and not like, you know, it's not like I caught him by his foot or anything, but he just slipped a little bit, and so I said, oh, he's so slimy. So that's the first thing I said after he was born. And I just kind of made sure I squeezed him a little tighter, wasn't so gentle with him, and brought him up, and I had him cradled. You know, I didn't have him all the way up. His umbilical cord wasn't crazy long or anything, so I just had him kind of, you know, right here. And Sean was looking over my shoulder, and we were admiring him, and I did see the gush of blood, and I could feel it. I was so into admiring my son that I wasn't paying, I guess, that close attention to any of it. Normally when you have a baby, they're inspecting the baby a whole lot, and they're not as concerned about you, and they did make sure he was okay. And in a birth center, normally they delay the cord clamping a lot longer, assuming there's no medical reason to cut the cord. So I was holding him, we were admiring him, they were going around, and I could tell that, you know, they were busy doing stuff, and that they were, but I guess I didn't catch the concern or anything at that point. So they clamped his cord fairly quickly and had Sean cut it really quick, and they were going and going and going, and I could see all the blood. And they said, we need to get the placenta out, we need to get the placenta out. And luckily I was on the birth stool, so there wasn't a lot of pushing I needed to do to get the placenta out. It just kind of fell out, as gross as that sounds. I know that I was concerned about pushing the placenta out because I've heard other women say how awful it is to push the placenta out, and it wasn't. I mean, I didn't have to push, so I mean, it just kind of fell out after he came out and after the cord was cut. So then they, I think I handed the baby to Sean at this point, or some of it is still kind of a little bit foggy to me. I don't think I was holding him at this point. I think that I had given him to someone else, and I got up on, they had me get up on the bed, which was right, the birth stool was right next to the bed, and so I got up on the bed, and they started checking, and they started pushing on my stomach and doing stuff down there and whatnot, and looking down there, and they, at this point is when I realized that I had lost more blood than I should have. They got a shot of Pitocin ready, and as they were giving me the shot in my thigh, they said, I'm giving you this of Pitocin. It wasn't, you know, normally in a birth center atmosphere, it's very much, they'll ask, are you okay with us doing this? Do you want us to do this? Let's talk about your options. It wasn't like that, which I get. It was an emergency situation. So I got the shot of Pitocin in my thigh, and they began to stitch me up and all that kind of stuff. And they continued pushing down on my stomach, where my uterus was, and every time they pushed, I could feel like just like gushes of blood coming out. So that was a little bit scary. I think it's more scary after the fact to think back on it than it was at the time, because at the time I was just I was aware of what was happening, but it was just this very it was a crazy experience, because I also just had my baby, and I was getting to admire him and love him and all this crazy experience, you know what I mean? So it was almost like out of body. At the time. Now I can look back on it and I'm like, ooh, that's scary. The Pitocin, I still continued to bleed more than I should have. They gave me, I believe it was called, that's not what it was called, I can't remember, it started with a C, and had me hold it in my cheek until it dissolved, and continued to bleed. At that point it did start to let up enough to where they weren't as concerned about it. I don't know how much I bled altogether. They never told me. They said that it wasn't quite a full-on hemorrhage. If it had been a full-on hemorrhage, they would have obviously transferred me to a hospital. They felt that they didn't need to do that after all the craziness was done. They had done everything, that it had slowed enough to where I was okay. So that was the fun with me. At that point, I had about an hour where we lived on Cooper. They had me drink a bunch of water. I ate some snacks, and we just spent that hour loving on our son. He was having some trouble breathing, so we began to suction his nose and whatnot during that time. At this point, the midwife leaves and the nurse stays with you until you're discharged. after the baby's born and everyone is stabilized and everything, the midwife leaves and the nurse stays and finishes. So he began to have issues breathing, and they were suctioning him and everything. It was getting closer and closer to what time I would have to go home. At a birth center, you can only stay there for so long, and then you have to either get transferred to a hospital or you have to go home. That's just like legally how it is. And so we were getting to where they were starting to be like, okay, you either need to leave or you need to go to a hospital and try to figure out what's going on. And so she was like, I'm just not really comfortable with how he's breathing. And so she's like, I want to call the midwife and ask her to come back in. And so she can really see and hear him. So the midwife came back in. It was getting worse and worse, his breathing was. It sounded like he was struggling more and more. At one point he started really gasping, like I can't even explain, but you could tell he was gasping, and you could see a look on his face that he was concerned about his breathing, if that makes sense. I can't explain it, but I could see on his face that he wasn't okay. And so they began to deep suction him. So they put a little tube down his throat and up his nose and began to deep suction him. It was really scary to watch. They had him hooked up to all the machines to on his fingers and stuff to check his oxygen, to make sure that he was getting enough oxygen. They had an oxygen mask on him, all that stuff. My washer's done. So that was kind of what was happening. They were still, neither one of them felt comfortable with how he was breathing. They got him to where he was seemed like, he was okay, but they said that by no means they felt like they wanted to send me home with him at that point. So they called their collaborating physician, who works at a local hospital, one of the women's hospitals there locally, that she's who they collaborate with if they have any questions or want to talk to them at all. So the midwife stepped out of the room and called the physician and asked kind of, her advice at this point, and the physician recommended that we transfer to a hospital. So, and I can try to hold myself together, but I could very easily get so emotional talking about all of this. I'm gonna save it for a part 2. I'm gonna continue filming, but this video's already about 30 minutes long. I think if I can read those little tiny numbers. But we transferred to a hospital and for Cooper and his breathing, and we were admitted to the NICU, and I'm gonna tell you guys a little bit about that in the part 2. So that'll come out. I'll check back. I'll probably put it up the next day after this video. This video will go up, and then on the next day, the second part will go up. So make sure that you come back and hear about the part 2 of kind of his little story after he was born. Alright, we'll see you guys in the next one. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss that video. Give it a thumbs up, and I'll catch you guys later. Bye, guys.